Okay, everybody, settle down. It is time for another episode of The Nostalgia Trap. I am your host, David Parsons. I've had way too much coffee this morning, so I will try not to ramble too much. But John McCain is dead, and I think all we have to say, the official line from Nostalgia Trap on that, is fuck John McCain. Fuck John McCain's entire political life. Fuck John McCain as a human being, and fuck him in his death. John McCain was a piece of shit. And I think that, the people on left Twitter who are joking about McCain's death are the people who really kept it alive for me. And, you might think like, oh, what an asshole thing to make fun of someone as they die. But to me, watching liberals literally try to canonize this dude at this moment in the mainstream media is just sickening. And so, what we're fighting as we make jokes about John McCain being in hell or being in a dumpster or whatever, those jokes are really, to me, meant to disrupt the hagiography that's happening in real time in the mainstream narrative. And we've talked about this on the show before. Young people especially need those moments. Young people need to see the cracks in the fucking lies and the cracks in the narrative that would put John McCain at the top of this pile of people we should honor and dignify in death. Fuck that. John McCain volunteered to drop bombs on Vietnamese civilians. John McCain did racist shit as a politician and said racist shit and really, just like Trump, and I think he led to Trump, he plumbed the depths of the American political landscape, and he aimed his political ideas at some of the shittiest people in America. They live in Arizona, if you're wondering. So, John McCain, he voted for every single American war. The people that John McCain's life impacted, they're dead, most of them. The Iraq War killed 1 million people. How am I supposed to respect that? How am I supposed to respect a man who spent his entire life aiming the American military machine at people that had no ability to fight back against it, and at some of the most vulnerable people on the planet? Fuck John McCain forever. And I could go on and on, but I did just want to point out that this idea that we have to stand for the national anthem or put our hand over our heart for John McCain is an idea that needs to die, because it is an idea that's tied to the worst elements of American nationalism, and John McCain certainly represented that throughout his entire life. So again, like I said, I had too much coffee. I'm pissed. Watching this John McCain timeline be kind of fixed in our minds, we have to fight against that, because we're really fighting against his memory and mythology that is being sanctified in American minds right now. That John McCain is a good guy and he's who we ought to aspire to be, and he's the best of our political system. If that's true, then our political system is worthless, and I think that a lot of people who listen to this show feel that way. Speaking of that, we've got candidates that are supposedly socialists in Brooklyn and other places who joined in on the loving John McCain in death thing. Honestly, reading Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's tweet about John McCain and how he was a man of unparalleled human decency was pretty fucking sickening. And for me, I think people who listen to this show know that I don't give a fuck about Democrats. They're always going to be that way. And the excitement about, DSA people going into the Democratic Party, I'm excited about that too. Sure, I want her to win. I don't want her to lose. But it's still pretty fucking disappointing to hear this same kind of, hagiographic idea coming from our supposedly radical candidates. One more thing I wanted to mention really quick. There was a nasty, as long as we're on the Brooklyn left, there was a nasty article about Julia Salazar in Tablet magazine that's been going around lately. I thought it was a shitty article in a lot of ways, in part because it made such a big deal about identity. It sounded like Trump challenging Obama's birth certificate in some ways. It's about, how Jewish is she, how Colombian is she, how immigrant is she, and I find a lot of that tasteless. And again, I must say, I do want Julia Salazar to win in Brooklyn. The Cuomo machine must be destroyed. Having said that, though, it wasn't that article disturbed me. It wasn't the identity stuff. It was finding out that Julia Salazar was president of the pro-life club at Columbia University while she was there, that she was on Glenn Beck's program saying all sorts of ugly Zionist pro-Israel shit. That shocked me. I did not know that about her. And I don't know what that means, and I know people's political attitudes change. I said all sorts of obnoxious conservative shit in high school and I think my early years of college. I'm glad there wasn't social media back then, because you could probably embarrass me with, things I said back then. But either way, and Salazar's past, I think, is worth talking about. And I don't mean the identity stuff. I mean the Zionist stuff and the pro-life stuff and the really ugly evangelical Christian conservative that she was just a couple years ago. That stuff needs to be answered to. And her statement that responded to the Tablet Magazine article didn't address any of that stuff. So again, I want her to win, and I want Ocasio-Cortez to win, and I want all the DSA people to win and destroy the centrist Democratic Party and move into it and start having an influence in the government. But I don't think that's what they're doing. I think they're just going to go be Democrats. And that part of it is something we ought to be thinking about in terms of our radicalism, our leftism, how much energy do we put towards that? And I know that's a big question. But my guest today is someone who's thought about these issues, and I know he would agree with me on the John McCain thing, because I saw him goofing on McCain and saying some really funny stuff on his Twitter. You should check him out. His name is Shuja Haider. Shuja is a writer who is active at a number of different cool publications, in particular editing at Viewpoint magazine and Popula. If you haven't checked out Popula, that's popula.com. He talks about what Popula is, so I'll let him do that. But Shuja's, he's an exciting voice in left media. He's someone who I listen to a lot. I read his stuff because I feel like he's kind of cutting through a lot of the old talking points from the left and the new ones too, and brings a kind of fresh, funny voice to writing about the left. So we had a really great conversation. We talked about his stuff. We talked about his brother's book about identity politics. And I think we're really just trying to frame what's happening generationally with the left and figure out exactly where we're at. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and enjoy all Nostalgia Trap conversations. You can find more stuff at nostalgiatrap.com. And if you subscribe to the show, subscribe to our Patreon, you will get access to bonus episodes and other fun stuff. So check that out. And thank you to all the people who are supporting the show. I always appreciate it. I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is me talking with lefty writer Shuja Haider. I feel like I see your name a lot more than I used to. Would you say this is the year that you glowed up? Is that the right terminology?
I got a full makeover. Yeah. Where are you seeing my name?
I guess on Twitter and in Popula. Is it Popula? That's the one?
Popula, yeah. It's a new magazine. I'm an editor there.
Yeah.
It's only been around about a month.
What is Popula?
But yeah. So, Popula is it's a new magazine that's based on a blockchain platform. If you ask me to explain that, I will totally fail. So don't even bother.
Yeah, same here. But it's internet magic of some kind.
Yeah. So that's just the underlying, foundation. But it's a publication that's trying to kind of decenter media from its kind of American coastal roots, you know. So we're trying to get a lot of international writers, just writers who have stories to tell that are not, the millionth "Why I'm Leaving New York" essay or whatever.
I was just about to write that one, dude.
Are you leaving?
No. I actually did leave New York. I was there for 15 years, and I just left.
Where are you?
I'm in Southern California now.
What? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I thought you were.
Yeah. I was a part of the, a tangential part, I guess, of the Brooklyn left, and that thing. Yeah. I mean, the Nostalgia Trap kind of grew out of me knowing a bunch of those people. And I totally get why you want to do get away from the whole coastal thing, because, there's a style, a certain style that, it's not anything against that kind of writing, but I've seen it a lot,
Well, it's just a limitation in what your vantage point is. Most people in the world don't live in a metropolitan coastal city in the United States.
Right.
And we hear from those voices disproportionately. Those voices in New York and LA and San Francisco and so on. So that's the goal of Popula, is to try to get out of that.
Where are you from originally? Are you from the world? Are you from the suburbs, or where are you from?
Yes, I am from the planet Earth.
Yeah.
I was born in State College, Pennsylvania, which is where most people know it because Penn State University is there.
Right.
That's where I was born, and my parents are from a city in Pakistan called Karachi. I did spend 2 years that I can't remember living there when I was an infant. But I grew up in a small college town in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were your parents attached to the college anyway? Was there like that town and gown thing in a college? You know what I'm talking about? That kind of
There's literally a local magazine called A Town and Gown in that town.
Yeah.
But my dad was a professor of architecture, and my mom was an administrator at the university. So, in fact, my brother Assad, who some listeners may know through his work at Viewpoint, or he just put out a book with Verso called Mistaken Identity. But he actually just got his PhD from University of Santa Cruz, which officially makes me the only person in my immediate family without a PhD.
Why am I talking to you?
Yeah, no credentials whatsoever, but street cred.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to have that. I'm looking at your posters. My back.
Oh yeah. We got Freud back here.
Yep.
And Lenin, who you may not be able to see. Let me see if I can point.
Wait, which Lenin are we talking about?
On the train to Petrograd in the red frame.
Nice.
There. And then that's Amitabh Bachchan, the Bollywood actor.
See, you can tell I just moved here because I've got just like the porno couch behind me, and that's about it.
I don't know. I think listeners should know you've got a really vibrantly colored throw rug.
Every
on the couch.
White person's house comes with one of those.
It's in the box.
Yep. They're like, here you go.
The equipment box. Yeah.
This is connected.
You gotta add some color. If the walls are white, you're white.
Yes. I know.
There's some color.
Oh my God. Well, I've never done this video thing. Usually with the podcast, what's nice about a podcast, if I'm on the phone with you, you can't see me doing like the jerk off motion while you're talking. You know what I mean? So it's like now you're gonna see me doing that.
Shit. I got to respond to nonverbal cues.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's a whole other layer.
Yeah.
Okay.
This whole interface is weird. I've had to do it a lot more because of work, like school and stuff like that, and like going on interviews, and it's just like, I don't know, it feels like you're turning everybody into like a fucking MSNBC guest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, with like a skyline behind.
Yeah, I just mean that like learning how to like talk to a digital face and kind of see, like, I'm looking at the green light right now instead of like looking at your face, because like looking at the green light looks like
it's distracting.
It looks like I'm making eye contact with you. Do you I
love when you watch TV news and they have a guest on satellite or whatever, and like there's a bit of a lag, and like the guest doesn't know it, but the anchor is freaking out about it.
That happened a lot. I feel like during like the early, like the first Iraq War. I'm old enough to remember like the first like Desert Storm, and they had people were always like listening, like it was always just a big delay, listening for like 5 seconds, and it was really weird. Yeah. Yeah, this do you like have any ambition to like be a talking head like that and go on like those shows and fight with Sean Hannity and stuff like that? Do you find value in that? Do you want to do that?
That's an interesting question.
I mentioned it because you tweeted about it recently. You said you said something like, lefties shouldn't go on. Well, you didn't say this, but you were responding to people saying lefties shouldn't go on Fox News because fuck them, they're Nazis. Well, you had a different take. I thought was interesting.
There's a couple layers to this. One layer is the ethical question, like is it some kind of ethical transgression to go on Fox News? I don't think so. I don't think you can apply the rubric of like no platforming or whatever to it, because the platform is there,
right?
And it's persisting every night, no matter what we do. If someone has the fortitude to go on there and put up with it, I think nothing much is lost, and there's potential gain. The degree to which that gain really takes place, I'm not sure. Though, you know, when I talked about this on Twitter, I heard from a lot of people who said, you know, I saw Bertel Ullman or Richard Wolff on Fox News when I was a kid, when my parents were watching it, and that was the first time I was aware of, left thought.
Right.
So
right.
that's kind of meaningful. And if you have the strength of will to do that, that's great. I don't. Like I would just probably. Well, maybe I would crumble. Maybe that's the more accurate way. But I just kind of imagine myself more like sputtering and yelling. You know.
Yeah.
On the rare occasions that I see what takes place on Fox News, like I develop a rash. It's horrible to me, and I don't think I could participate in that conversation without getting very angry. But you know, if you can do it, if you can go and make your case, that's kind of a very old ethic of organizing, you know, of political organizing. Yeah. That you go into the places where political ideology is being disseminated, and you put forth a perspective on behalf of the oppressed. That's something people have been doing for a long time, whether it's, you know, the industrial workers of the world with their, soapboxing, or, you know, Huey Newton of the Black Panthers went on William F. Buckley's TV show.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Yeah. And even like, Malcolm X was on these like really stuffy, racist, awful TV shows. And he came on there and schooled them. And it was like, those clips are still like classic YouTube clips I like showing class and stuff. And you're right. Like for me, it's like those are like the cracks in the mainstream where you see like, oh shit, like there's that guy just said something real. Like I've watched this like fake ass program for half an hour, but like 5 minutes happened and there was this awesome guy. Like, do you remember the guy that like I forget his name? He came on Bill O'Reilly and he like fucked with him about like his father was killed in 9/11 and like Bill O'Reilly was trying to like because this guy was this kid whose father had died in 9/11 was like,
I do remember
against the wars, and Bill O'Reilly was like, how can you be against the war? These people killed your father, this and that, and he fucking destroyed Bill O'Reilly to the point where Bill O'Reilly like got so mad that he like kicked him off the show and apparently like physically threatened him and everything. And like to me, I'm like, you're right, that guy's a hero, and I'm glad he went on the show.
Yeah, I mean, if you can watch, Huey Newton on the Firing Line, William F. Buckley's show, I think on PBS, you can see that on YouTube. Huey asks Buckley whether he would have supported the Revolutionary War, that led to the founding of America, and he's flustered. That's a document of the political dialogue of the time now. And that's kind of a valuable document for us to have.
Totally.
That's my, and I'm not one of these people who says like, that free speech is some kind of abstract thing. And like when Charles Murray comes to your campus, you have to sit silently and let him say whatever bullshit he wants to say. But like that's a case of whether you provide him a platform. In the case of Fox News, the platform is there. It's a case of whether we invade the platform. Right. And I think probably we should conduct guerrilla warfare in that platform.
I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, it feels like, and like I said, like those moments that when I was young, seeing the little things. I mean, even like Allen Ginsberg was on Buckley. There's a great clip of the two of them talking, and I don't know. It's like now there's starting to be, and you talk about, you mentioned Popula, and there's a ton of them, and we mentioned the Brooklyn left or whatever, that there's this like this thing happening with left media that like didn't exist when we were younger. I think you're young.
Absolutely.
You're younger than I am. You're an odd age. You're one of those like what, like are you like early?
I'm one of those in between millennials.
Yeah.
I'm not on the younger end where I know all the memes. Yeah. And I'm not on the older end where I look down on the memes either. Yeah. I'm somewhere stuck. A man with no country. Yeah, but
I feel that. Well, it's hard to like. I don't know. I talk to my students about that a lot, and they just always they're like, who cares? Their idea is like, that those generational identities are just kind of like made up anyway. Who gives a fuck?
Well, like this is when I was a kid, there wasn't even really MSNBC yet.
That's right.
I don't even remember if the channel existed, but it didn't have this definition as like the liberal Democrat.
Not at all.
News source. So when I was a kid, my kind of process of becoming aware of politics, I think starts under the Clinton administration, and it starts with the impeachment proceedings. But I started to become involved in politics myself at the time of the second Iraq War in 2003, and that's when I started going to protests and really keeping track of what was going on. And at that time, there were these kinds of scattered outlets that you didn't even really have the awareness to distinguish between what might have been like conspiracy theories and what was actually
totally
actual reporting.
Right.
But I remember reading Alternate, Counterpunch, and Counterpunch still has literally the same design as it did. I think 20 years ago.
Same with like Daily Kos, like that one looks exactly. And I mean, when thinking about that now and like the whole Marcos thing and like now and then looking back at how I thought that was like so revolutionary and radical when I was younger at that age. I thought, I mean, those were the kind of left-wing people I thought. Like I couldn't really decipher, or I couldn't really distinguish between all those different things. Like you're saying, it was like finding this stuff was hard enough. Like there wasn't a lot out there.
I think I didn't actually read the Daily Kos or anything. I don't think I never really got involved in party politics. In terms of the Democratic Party. Going up to the election in 2000, I think that before the election, I kind of saw myself as a Democrat, even though I was too young to vote. But it was after that election that I started to think, actually, I might be to the left of the Democrats, because it was the reaction to Nader's candidacy and everything that I thought, this seems contrary to the idea of, democratic representation that was supposed to be, what we were engaging in during this election. The way the backlash against Nader and against third party politics.
And also how Gore just rolled over for the Supreme Court thing. Like,
he did.
That was so embarrassing. And it felt like, that's where you got that like thing, that West Wing thing where they're like, well, it's really the good of the country over the party. And it's like, you dumb fucks, what are you doing?
Shit.
Like, and
yeah, I remember there was like a congressional hearing and that a congressman, I don't remember who it was, but he was kind of speaking about the way that the election was manipulated, that there was voter disenfranchisement, that there was possible, exclusion of legitimate votes and so on. And, Gore was presiding over this session and he just kind of banged his gavel and was like, we're done with that now. It's time to move on.
That's in the Michael Moore movie.
This is personal for me.
Yeah.
You know, like, fuck you, dude. It's not actually about you. Like,
that's it.
We're not defending you. We're defending the right of the citizens to vote.
I think it's the opening of Fahrenheit 9/11.
I think you're right.
And the way he frames it is that it's all basically like the Congressional Black Caucus and like all the African American, like all the like literally every single like congressperson of color.
Rights.
And Gore is shutting them down. It's a fucking surreal.
And Gore's
scene.
like, you guys don't have to take my side here. It's like, fuck you, man. They're not taking your side. This is about the citizens who tried to vote.
Yeah. And what's fucked up about that, and like we're sitting here, 17 years later, 18 years later, and we're like, the world is destroyed. We're like basically just talking in the ashes here. But like Bush, he left us with that world. Like Gore doing that whole like Michael Moore scene is so like haunting now, because I showed it like recently in a class, and the students were like, they were like freaking out, because it's like, dude, this is like a big, like you rarely see like a fulcrum that like heavy in history, of like a turning point where it's like, oh shit, this is what the Democrats are going to be in the face of the Republicans. And then you got the punch of 9/11. It's like, that's when now like all that power is in their hands, and that's been our lives.
Yeah.
End of story.
I mean, this is the type of thing that came up a lot when I was first starting to pay attention to politics and to participate in activism. That 9/11 kind of closed the door. It kind of like foreclosed a lot of the possibility of debate and dissent within that kind of nexus of mainstream politics. And that was kind of eagerly anticipated by the right, to be frank.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in writing in the Project for a New American Century document.
Yeah.
Right? That I don't know if it was, I think it was Paul Wolfowitz.
Yeah, Richard Pearl.
Some of the Richard Pearl members of the Bush administration were involved in writing that. I think they said something like a catalyzing Pearl Harbor type incident.
That's right.
Would provide the occasion for them to begin implementing a policy of kind of global domination, which is what they proceeded to do. Yeah. Very directly. So their mouths were watering over this shit, and that's what they got. And the Democratic Party let them have it, and that was a kind of initiation to politics for me. It's I think for a lot of people of my generation, loosely defined, that we either started to become aware of politics with the Iraq War, or we started to become involved in politics with the protests of that. If I'm not mistaken, up until that point, the largest mobilization of citizen protests across the world was against the Iraq War. Yeah. I think that might have been exceeded after Trump's election. Yep. But at that time, it was huge, and we kind of all understood that the world opposes this military action, and for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. But it proceeded to take place anyway. Yeah. So my entrance to politics was one of disillusionment and defeat, which is our whole generation.
Yeah, but it's like welcome to the left too. You know? Like get used to feeling like a loser.
Well, but that's the thing is that increasingly I talk to people for whom younger people for whom their first moment of being aware of politics was not the Iraq War, but the Bernie Sanders candidacy. Yeah, which. I don't know. It's probably too soon to say what kind of conclusions they drew from it or where that led them, but very much a different kind of moment. And I think that I'm certainly to the left of Bernie Sanders, and I'm probably on the left flank or outside the left flank of a lot of the spectrum of the Democratic Socialists of America or whatever. But that moment, I think it did represent a kind of a rupture in the kind of deadening procession of the political status quo. And that's, for us now, I think our project kind of has to tap into that, whether or not that means a participation in electoral politics. And actually, I think the best aspects of our political work now will be outside of that. But
you're talking about getting guns, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about
arming
blowing
up
shit up.
Yep.
dude, I'm gonna get arrested when you release this podcast, but you too maybe. So at least maybe we'll share something.
We've had a few revolutionary conversations about this stuff. It's dorm room talk, man. The Bernie Sanders thing, though, it's weird because you're old enough to remember Sanders. Like if you remember the first Iraq War, Sanders was always like this voice in the wilderness. I always kind of felt sorry for him. Like I was like, there's this
incredible footage of him doing an address in the halls of Congress against the first Iraq War. Yeah, and you can see this on YouTube. He's talking about, he's laying out his case, and then the camera pans to the gallery, and there's like literally no one there. Yeah,
it's empty.
He was just delivering it to an empty hall.
There's like you can see like a janitor in the back mopping up, and that's it. Yeah, so that now we're in a moment like that, and that's what's I think kind of incredible. Whether I'm like with Bernie Sanders or not, is kind of like watching young people be into him, especially. But then also like watching the like smears of like Bernie, like all of that. was just kind of exactly, I mean, what I've expected from the Democratic Party for a really long time. But it's so, I don't know, it's getting so old to me. I guess it just seems old because I remember like when Obama was running and like the primaries, the Hillary people were like really fucking nasty. Like really shitty to just Obama, who like I view as like a total like ruling class establishment figure or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like the Sanders thing. You know, there must be a lot of people in that ruling class section of the society, wherever they are, the reptile people who are scared of Bernie Sanders for sure.
The thing is, they produced that kind of political opposition.
Yeah.
Bernie, I kind of didn't actually. You know,
right.
When he announced his candidacy, I was like, this is a fucking ploy to get me to register as a Democrat.
Right. He's a sheepdog.
And eventually just end up voting for Hillary anyway.
Right.
So I was like, I'm not participating in this charade. And then, you know, the debate started to happen where, you know, the establishment of the party and the establishment of the liberal media started to say, this guy is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the point where I started to say, actually, maybe this represents something else. And I would say even now, even looking back, I'm less interested in Bernie Sanders, the candidate, than I am in the people who mobilized around him.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in how we can kind of build on that mobilization and potentially apply it outside of the electoral arena to labor, to to direct action, just to understanding politics as being outside of the limited, kind of American gladiator match between two capitalist parties.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of political motivation to be found in like a broken heart, you know, and like there's and especially young people, I think can be moved by like being disappointed. You know, if that makes sense. And like, I just can't help but thinking that the 2020 is going to disappoint them. But I feel like there's also been just like cycles of that with the Democratic Party for so long. And I wonder, and like, you know, you've mentioned how wrong, you know, you've been in the past, and I've been wrong in the past, and like how you're viewing things in the moment. Because you know, when you're on the like kind of left outside of that electoral, you know, American gladiator system, you always tend to, I always tend to view it as just like, you know, cartoonish, like I'm not like participating in that at all. But then like, I don't know, the 2016 election made everybody kind of see that it didn't feel like the same thing in a lot of ways. It feels like even Trump is, I mean, I don't know, I'm one of these people that feel like people voted for Trump because they didn't get to vote for Bernie Sanders, if that makes sense. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like all those swing state people that like felt like Trump was a fuck you vote. I mean, I know we're like, there's no way to really figure out exactly why this happened, but it feels like that there was an immense amount of frustration in this country with the establishment after Obama bailed out the bankers after the financial crisis. And you know, you talked about like Bernie Sanders being the moment where all the young people are into it. And I'm hearing that on this show. Like I had Alex Press on recently, who you know, she's a Jacobin writer. She's young. Her thing was Occupy, like Occupy Wall Street, like got her into the left, right? Like in 2011. So, and that was, I feel like Occupy happened during Obama, right? Like people were frustrated as hell with like what was happening. I don't know. I feel I don't know how many people who were gonna vote for Bernie voted for Trump, but there's like Trump feels like a Bernie candidate in the sense of like a rejection of whatever's happening in Washington, even though Trump is very much not as much a rejection of what Washington I think as people think.
That's true. It's a hard question to answer. I mean, I think that after the election. Well, I'll put it this way. To me, I saw the election as probably the most solid evidence in the modern era of the failure of liberalism. You know, and I think that liberals were eager to displace the blame. You know, and I think they need to own up to that. It's really hard, and the reason I'm very hesitant here is because it's so hard for us to figure out what happened after an election with polling data and exit polls and all these statistics that, like, you know, you can kind of deploy towards whatever narrative
you want to create. Yeah, that's true.
But ultimately, what we do know is that what should have been a blatant, resounding victory for the liberal center was instead a totally unexpected failure. Right? I mean, nobody was expecting that shit. I was there. I was watching the New York Times had this tracker of, like, the probability that each candidate was going to win that night in 2016.
Yeah. I remember this, and it like flicked in an hour. It just flicked from 99% Clinton.
Dude, I remember watching this, and Hillary Clinton's chart, like it was going from 50% or whatever, down. And to the point that, like, she had only a 1% chance of winning with, like, minutes left before all the results came in. And I was like, well, that's still 1%. You know? There's this probability isn't certain. You know.
That was a weird night, and like I was at a talk about Brooklyn Left. I was like at a Chapo Trap House like live event, like where they were doing the election. Are you serious? You were in that room? That's funny.
Yeah. We were sharing that moment.
That's funny. So you felt that kind of like gut punch in the room where like people were like, "What the fuck?" And it was like, and it was in part because, like, I don't know, the Chapo people and everybody that was commenting and listening to this, not just Chapo, but like all of us were like kind of so smug. And maybe that's the coastal bubble, but like part of it was just like, dude, like what the real nightmare is that Clinton's gonna win. Like that was the nightmare. And that was what I was dealing with. I was ready for 8 years of this shit. But instead, like, we went into wacky world. And like it was weird to be in that room and like feel that rift like literally happen, where it's like the generation has another duty now. Perhaps I don't know what that duty is, but yeah, that's we're in a different world now than I think we anticipated being in.
Yeah, no, I remember waking up the next day and commuting to work and looking around me and thinking like I'm not in real life anymore.
Yeah, totally.
And now that parallel universe is the real universe. I mean, I guess the question is, how different has it been from the world we were in before?
Yeah.
There's frankly a lot of continuity. I think a lot of things have gotten worse, and that's really serious. And those are things to deal with. But I think a lot of the things that the mainstream of liberal politics is really concerned with are largely irrelevant to people's lives.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just I don't think ultimately that most Americans are worried about whether it's the American president or Vladimir Putin who's fucking them over. Like, as long as they're getting fucked over.
Yeah.
And the issue is that if the best the liberal center can do is, well, we're going to have a natural born American fuck you over. It's not doing much,
No, the Russian stuff. It's another one of those things that I'm like gonna probably eat my words eventually, because like tomorrow he'll be impeached, or like tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who the fuck knows? But I'm with you on the sense of like it's bad. It seems like bad politics for the Democrats to like focus all their attention on like this is a Russian operation that's happening. Yeah. Because I think you're right.
Maybe. I don't even know. I mean, yeah, sure. There's kind of a global oligarchy that's less concerned with national allegiances than it is with the production of profit for the global ruling class. Sure, that's something that that I believed before Trump was president.
Yeah.
And remains true. As to whether that is the kind of issue around which American politics orbits, I don't think that's true for the electorate, for one thing.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think that it's a convenient distraction from the failures of the political status quo to actually provide a decent life for most people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and in that sense, I mean, that's why it's kind of it's nice to be on the left, because it's the capitalism is just you talk about continuity, like it's capitalism's the problem, right? Like that's been the problem. And to me, like seeing Trump take over and seeing like, I don't know, the kind of hyperbole of mainstream Democrats about like what's happened to our democracy and what's happened to our republic, and I'm like, dude, I've been living in hell for like, like since the beginning, and if you know American history, it's a lot more at least admit it's a lot more complicated than like our democracy is now sullied because this TV show host is our president. It feels a lot like they're just offended by him personally. This was like during the Bush years though too. You remember this dude, like Bush, like people hated Bush because he was like uncouth. Because he was like...
Yeah, because he couldn't construct a full sentence or whatever.
Yeah, they were like, oh, he's a dumb redneck. And like you really heard the like elitism just came right out of people. And I mean, whatever, like Bush's a piece of shit. But like it's weird to like that's the piece of shit element you point out of it about it.
Right.
Like he also like killed 1 million people in Iraq. Like I don't care about his accent,
It's I mean, that kind of misses the way that power works, because he may have been the guy who was trotted out to appear on television to justify whatever kind of actions that were being taken on behalf of the consolidation of ruling class power. But he had these very devious, well-educated people constructing that policy. So his being a kind of a tongue-tied redneck doesn't really affect the fact that those policies were, very expertly engineered to preserve existing power structures.
Right.
These are all Ivy League, guys who studied with Leo Strauss shit. They're not dumb yokels.
No, they're Milton Friedman motherfuckers, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I don't know. There's this weird, to get back to like the Bernie Sanders thing and like the young people and the millennials and all that. It's like there's also I feel like there's things are going all ways, because you also have like the Jordan Peterson has like this this influence on young people, and I'm like students are starting to ask me about what I think of Jordan Peterson and like stuff like that.
No shit.
Yeah. And then so like there's this like right curious thing going on with young people as I don't know, like that like I cringe every time I hear people say like conservatism is the new punk rock or whatever, but like how do we kind of like counter that? How do we address that young people are also, kind of playing with the right?
That is a rough spot for us to be in.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've given some thought to, and I'm not sure how it plays out really, but that whole conservatism is the new punk rock thing. I think that comes about. I'm just being hesitant here because it's something that I've gotten into a lot of debates about, and there's a lot of really valid different perspectives here, but the situation that we're grappling with, I think, is that a lot of people see the left as a kind of restrictive or regulatory ideology,
right?
And that's not true. That's not who we are. That's not what the ideals that we espouse represent. But people have this perception, and it comes down to the very shrewd attack that the right has been carrying out for decades now.
Yeah.
The culture wars,
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea of political correctness. That the left is the group that wants you to, watch what you say every time you speak. I don't know. I personally do think that's something that we have to figure out a way to address.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that means capitulating to the caricature that's presented by the right. I think that just means trying to reclaim, the ethic of liberation, of emancipation that undergirds, left movements and left philosophy. The achievement of equality is the act of liberation.
Yeah,
that it's not, it doesn't mean self-regulation. And that's exactly what that misreading is, exactly what people like Jordan Peterson have seized upon and manipulated to their advantage. So they're presenting the situation where they're the ones speaking these so-called forbidden truths and allowing you to really, unleash your id and all of that shit. Actually, this is kind of a long-standing strategy of the far right. Of fascism, is to tap into that element and redirect it away from liberation towards hierarchy and oppression.
Yeah, and it's something really ironic about them, like kind of looking to the left as like the regulatory ones, when like the right is where I always think of as like authority and fascism and all those kind of ideologies of like deep, powerful control and power is comes from the right, and the left I always saw as that's where that's where people are trying to liberate themselves from all that stuff. It's weird because it plays out. You're right. It plays out in culture. I was the like Burning Man was popular in the 90s. Like it still is. Burning Man's about to happen now, right? It's like next week. I'll see you there. But like
I'll be on the dune against the sunset.
Yeah, but the idea of like a kind of liberational politics, or liberatory politics, like matched into the culture. As another thing, I was so young in the 90s that I looked to things like Burning Man. I thought, oh, that's like the left. That's like what they want, Whereas like the right is like a guy in a suit with like a gray haircut, a short gray haircut, and like basically George W. Bush or something like that. A conservative is like a businessman. But now like conservatism, has almost like it's almost inverted. Like conservatism and the libertarians are like Burning Man, literally, and like talking about like the transformative power of capital and shit like that. And it's been I think for young people especially, that's got to be really confusing, because like who's cool and what's cool and what am I supposed to like be into?
This is what's happened in the past 20, 30 years with the kind of growth of Silicon Valley culture and the internet and this new kind of wave of capitalism. It kind of included this incorporation of counterculture, the kind of classic mold of hippie counterculture in the 60s. This famous paper that describes this as the Californian ideology,
right?
That kind of absorbs both the extreme libertarianism of Ayn Rand and that whole trajectory of the Austrian economists, and kind of meshes it with this ideal of freedom that was supposedly drawn from the 1960s counterculture, the free love and all of that. I don't know. They kind of pulled it off, didn't they?
They did.
They kind of made.
Dude, I had a lot of like stoner friends in college that like started calling me after college and were like, "Dude, I'm fucking reading this book. It's called The Fountainhead, and you gotta pick it up." And it's blowing my mind. And I was like, "Really?" And I didn't really grasp exactly what that was, but then eventually I knew who Ayn Rand was. But like the point is like, I ended up after college, the thing that blew my mind, I was like, oh my God, college was bullshit. And like, they didn't teach me anything real. Like that was like reading like Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein and like all these like kind of radical leftists. So it's like, I guess my point is, and maybe it's because it's something to do with young white guys too, but like, or young guys, young American guys, whatever, coming out of college, there's this thing that happens to a subset of them that's like, everything I learned in college is bullshit. And like, there's something else, there's some other reality. All the professors were wrong. And like, that can go either way, like that can go to me. I was like, oh, all my professors were fucking liberals. Like they were basically like boring New Deal liberals. And like, they didn't understand capitalism the way I do. But like friends of mine were like, no, they were liberals. And like, that's what made them wrong, and that's why I'm a conservative now. And so, yeah, I guess it's like a misunderstanding in some ways of like what a liberal is and everything else. But that's a difficult territory. I feel like we are feeling that even more accelerated now, that kind of impulse.
Yeah, I feel a little disadvantaged because I never went through a phase where I read the Ayn Rand novels or anything. Did you read The Fountainhead?
No, I don't know. I read, what I read? The Wikipedia entry about The Fountainhead.
Oh yeah, that's even further than I've gotten.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's.
I think it's bad. I think you can assume it's bad, right?
I do assume that, yeah, but I think.
But it resonates with people, obviously. So.
There's just kind of an attraction to something that's outside of the, kind of conventional wisdom, the consensus, because there's just a recognition that the consensus has not worked, that it has not provided a, successful outcome for everybody. And that's the assumption that like, mainstream liberalism desperately wants you to accept. It just like during the Hillary Clinton campaign when she said America is already great. And of course, lots of people reacted to that like, what the fuck are you talking about? I can't afford to see a doctor or whatever. So if somebody, maybe it's just a question of random chance, just the first person you come across who says, no, you're right. Actually, it's not working. It's fucked up. Yeah. And you're a victim of it. Maybe just the first person who tells you that, you recognize that at least that part of their diagnosis is correct. So you're going to follow them and see where it goes. And maybe that's the appeal of the far right. And
well, the internet also is layered on top of that too, where it's like, you had this kind of
just expands the reach.
Yeah, there was always that kind of like widespread animosity or hatred of the status quo, that could go either way, but then now that there's the internet, there are actually like places for it to go and you like can find it. Like Alex Jones is waiting for you. You know what I mean? Like he's waiting for you online. Just, you've been wanting to click that and eventually you do. And you eventually do because maybe one of your friends at the gym is like, bro, you checked out this Alex Jones video, and you check it out, and then you're fucked because he's got your mind and you're believing in reptiles and all that shit. So it's
once you're taking the super male vitality supplements.
Yeah, well, those work, dude.
You're getting the best erections of your life.
Yeah. Dominant. What are you going to do? Powerful erections. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's also weird, too, because, like, I don't know, there's all this animosity and hatred aimed at college kids. Like, and I'm a college teacher, so and so I'm like, first of all, fuck you, for like going after people who are like young and learning, but also like it's just, you're right. I mean, it's a caricature and a stereotype. Like when I hear these guys talking about like Marxists indoctrinating students, like it's just like, have you ever been on a fucking college campus? Have you ever met a college student? Do you know what they're like? But having said that, I will say that there is something like, I don't know, the evergreen college stuff, the like Brett Weinstein shit, some of that like stuff is like really ripe for parody. It gets like really kind of crazy. But like, I also like, this is the identity politics thing for me, is that, and the way it works for me in part is because I'm a white dude. I don't feel like super comfortable like going online and just being like, fuck identity politics and like, you know what I mean? Like there's an identity thing for me, and being like, every time I see those dudes doing that, I'm like fucking disgusted by them. And I always see that it's not in the service of anything like I am into, and it's certainly not in the service of like a left project at all. Like they want to like create this image of like, hypersensitive Marxist
Absolutely.
students that are all transgender and shit because they want to scare people and they want to fucking turn the country into, a much more conservative place socially. So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard because, like, your brother wrote about identity politics, right? Like, he has a whole book about
Assad's
it.
book is about the history of how people conceived of race and racism and racial oppression and how they strategized the fight against it. And, it's difficult to talk about something called identity politics because it means something very different for many people. And just, when someone invokes the phrase, that, it almost doesn't even tell you what they're talking about.
Right.
Because it can function so many ways. So I think that there is kind of a shorthand whereby people assume that there are different spheres of politics that are separate and, maybe even opposed. And one of them is identity, and that's where race and gender fall into. And there's another sphere of class, which is outside of that. This is not a kind of objective way of thinking. It's a historically specific way of thinking, and it's a relatively recent way of thinking. We did see this kind of opposition hypothesized a lot during the 2016 primary, where people were talking about Bernie as being kind of economic reductionism, and it doesn't suitably address issues related to identity. Hillary Clinton made this point repeatedly. If we broke up the banks, would that end racism? She said.
Zing.
Yeah, I mean, as though those are mutually exclusive projects. Which
I would answer to her question like maybe it might. It would be a good step. Maybe it's part of that project. Yeah.
And that's a very specific way of thinking, to say those are separate, mutually exclusive projects.
Right. Yep.
And it's not the way of thinking that's been held by anti-racist movements in our history. The people often forget that the March on Washington wasn't just about voting rights; it was about jobs.
Yeah.
These movements.
That was the title of it. It was the March on Washington for Jobs and Housing, I think.
Yeah. And Martin Luther King, increasingly throughout his life, became involved in the Poor People's Campaign. The Black Panthers, of course, were explicitly communist revolutionaries.
Yep.
Before that, our most eminent commentators on racial oppression, W.B. Du Bois, they drew from the Marxist tradition. The idea that there are these non-overlapping competing questions of class and race, or however you want to understand them, that's something that you have to actively hypothesize and defend.
Yeah.
And there is kind of an assumption of this when people talk about this stuff. Even when you say, class politics and identity politics can be reconciled, you're already beginning from the assumption that they are separate spheres,
right?
Which is an assumption that kind of begins probably like in the 1980s. It's not like just a permanent fact of human existence. Race is not a permanent fact of human existence.
Right.
That's something that it has been developed over centuries.
The way we talk about race is like specific to our era, and even our racial categorizations are like specific to our era.
So I don't really want to accept that underlying premise that there's a kind of there are these separate strands of politics.
No.
But a lot of the time, people will invoke identity politics because there's a kind of a dismissal of anti-racist work, or a refusal to acknowledge racial oppression, or that based on gender or whatever, and that'll be the right position. But the language, is so overloaded with different potential implications that we end up spiraling into these debates that kind of bring us away from the questions at hand. I frankly try to avoid using that phrase as much as I can.
Oh, totally.
At this point, but the people who do use it most aggressively at this point are the people who really want to confirm this separation of those issues and in order to dismiss them.
Right.
And
right.
that's something to reject and to fight against,
totally.
Anywhere it appears.
Yeah.
But I think the best way to do that is to not accept the underlying premise that,
I agree.
These are separate.
Yeah, and you're right. And I mean, just as someone who studies the 60s and 70s, those quote unquote like identity movements of the 60s and 70s that are in all the textbooks of like all these quote unquote liberation movements of like liberation movements of gay people, of women, of black and brown people all across the United States. Those liberation movements, if you read their material, it's like entirely about capitalism. Like that's all they talk about. Like that's all. I mean, the people that were behind Stonewall, and ultimately that movement that morphed into the movement that was going to confront the AIDS crisis in the 80s. Like, if you watch, like, even just the documentary How to Survive a Plague, which is about that, like, that ACT UP organization, they were filled with radicals, dude. Like, they did not, it wasn't, like, a separate thing at all. Like, they all saw this as, like, capitalism is killing gay men because of its indifference, because of its, I mean, we've got the conservative government with Reagan, but it was... more than that, it was pharmaceutical companies. There were like they had to negotiate the levers of capitalism in order to save their own lives. And so, like you talk about identity and like capitalism mixed up, they can be separated in things like that. And that's the whole history of the kind of movements that have achieved victory. And that I think is hard too. Like I was just what you were talking about just now, it was making me think about like all those movements in the 60s and 70s and how they're like, those are our models of success often for the left, It's like, oh, well, the civil rights movement, you look at the civil rights movement, they actually succeeded. And they succeeded in the territory of like winning like dignity for human beings. But they didn't succeed in toppling capitalism, right? Yeah. And it wasn't like about that really. And we talk about that as like this side issue. And even like Martin Luther King is not like, people remember his I Have a Dream stuff, but they don't remember the like hardcore anti-capitalist shit he was saying at the end of his life. Like that's not what we're supposed to remember. That's not what's on the fucking statue. That's not where they like make Hollywood movies about. They make movies about him. Understandably so. I mean,
every year on Martin Luther King Day, like National Review or Commentary or something will publish, an article that's like, well, here's how Martin Luther King was actually a conservative or whatever.
Oh totally.
Like everyone is eager to claim that legacy. But the thing is, that legacy wasn't so open-ended.
Right.
It was kind of directed towards a broader critique of our social systems. I mean, when it comes to you can read about the history of this language in detail in Assad's book, but. We even get the phrase identity politics from a socialist organization, the Comedy River Collective. Who
I didn't know that. When is that?
I believe the statement was from 1979.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a group of black feminists, lesbian black feminists, who kind of made the observation that their participation in various movements kind of precluded their participation in other movements. So like the feminist movement was very much directed towards the interests of white women, whereas the Black Power movement was kind of mostly carried out by black men. So they were saying, what if we started from our perspective as black women? And that's where they kind of introduced this phrase identity politics. I mean, you know, the phrase may have come up accidentally before, but they really kind of brought it out there. And if you read that statement, which I encourage people to do, it's a very radical, very powerful statement. It's a very thorough systemic critique of capitalism. But it's one that says, if a liberation movement isn't speaking for us, then it's got a problem, you know?
Right.
And the thing is, you know, this concept...
That's the Sojourner Truth shit, the ain't I a woman, you know?
Exactly, yeah. But the kind of recuperation of that concept started to happen almost immediately.
Right.
So by the point that you have Kimberly Crenshaw writes her Introduction of Intersectionality, she's already opposing it to something that she calls identity politics.
Right, right.
And in the name of the same idea, which is that how do you represent black women when these are generally conceived of as opposing interests, racial justice and sexual justice. And she, you know, I mean, this kind of problem keeps recurring. And I don't know whether the approach is to reclaim this language or to try to create new language. But either way, I think the problem is when you allow it to become separate and opposed to other political questions, rather than seeing it as an elaboration on, a modification of, a correction of an existing program for justice.
And I mean, if there's one argument that's compelling to me about like the, you know, anti-identity politics, whatever, is just seeing the right co-opt to language and seeing the right like do these like Blue Lives Matter.
That's creepy, right?
Like Blue Lives Matter, like that shit. To me, that like when I heard that, like Blue Lives Matter to me represents that kind of like cynical, you know, co-optation. But it also makes me think always that the
I've heard they're even saying.
They're really savvy.
Saying Green Lives Matter in reference to Pepe the Frog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was going to be about Nader. I wasn't sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure what Green Lives Matter is.
I had the Green Lives Matter poster up in my lawn after that election.
That to me, that idea of like that identity politics or whatever, that the template of it can be kind of moved to places that aren't really even like identities that you're born with, but ones that you kind of take on, like being a cop or something like that. There's like, I'm from the suburbs, and I just moved like back to the suburbs in my life, and like, you know, the kind of difference between like living in Brooklyn for 15 years and like coming back here is really jarring, and like seeing like the politics. And what I noticed is that there's an identity in American politics that's a homeowner, that's like the homeowner, and it's very close. It's racialized 100%. But it like it makes me think of what you were saying about the kind of like, you know, how these things are entangled, because it's like the identity of homeowner is totally racialized, white and everything, but it's also like I have bought into the system by buying a house, you know, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm like paying a mortgage, I'm doing the right thing, and as a result I have like a kind of like set of rights that kind of exceed the rights of other people. I mean, the idea of like, you know, you step on my property and I can murder you. People love to point that out. Like, like they love to point out that like you step on my property, I'm allowed to kill you legally, and like that's Trayvon Martin shit. And like that's, to me, that's the language of white supremacy. But like the homeowner identity,
it's got deep roots, right? Because the initial conception of voting rights in this country was not just restricted to white men, but to property owners.
Yeah.
So the notions of white supremacy are already bound up in kind of capitalist property possession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God, what a world. Shuja, I had a great time talking to you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. Good luck with everything you're doing.
Much appreciated.
All right, I'll talk to you later. All right, everybody. I want to thank my guest, Shuja Haider. I had a really great time talking with him. And if you go to the Nostalgia Trap YouTube page, you can actually watch this conversation because I press record on our FaceTime video. So check out me and Shuja talking. If you want to check it out on YouTube, you can hear the whole podcast and see our facial expressions as we talk there. And thanks for everyone who is supporting the show. Go to nostalgiatrap.com. See all our episodes. We have more than, I think, 112 episodes up there now for free. And some bonus episodes, too, if you want to subscribe and get access to those. That's at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Thanks, as always. I hope you have a great week. We will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.